19.9 miles away from her comfortable bed, away from her parents who have loved her unconditionally, and away from her dog everyone said she would never leave behind, lays the body of a young girl who was taken from this world with only one word whispered as her last. Why? Sheila and Rachel drove back to Morgantown without the girl who completed their trio. They laughed, they smoked pot, and they acted as if nothing happened just the other side of the West Virginia-Pennsylvania border. In reality, they were two girls who believed that enough crime drama television meant they could get away with the perfect murder. A few Google searches, concealed weapons, and a little bit of cleaning solution, and now their unsuspected target was gone. Neither girl realized what they had set into motion when they reacted to their friend missing with their ditzy attitudes and faked emotional responses. But investigators knew just where to start digging. Welcome to the True Crime Librarian. I'm your librarian and host, Ashley. Tonight we are going back to high school where catty cliques rule the school, where having a difference of opinion meant that you could no longer be a part of the group, and where late night three-way phone calls were made so they could call you out on whatever it is they felt you did wrong. The only exception is now we're a part of a world with social media. A world where if you have a difference of opinion, it could mean far more than just cutting you out. Where being jealous, annoying, or simply the third wheel could cost you your life. Warning. This episode contains graphic detail of murder, adult situations, and adult language. Listeners' discretion is advised. If you feel any of this may be too much for you, please skip this episode or have someone listen with you or for you. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining me tonight. I wanted to thank all of you who have stuck with me thus far and who follow me on Facebook and Instagram. I'm sure you saw my video where I announced that there has been an inadvertent pattern that has developed with the librarian where I take a week off after so many cases. If you're not following me on Facebook or Instagram, go do that. I'm at the True Crime Librarian, and that way you never miss an update with me. I want to introduce you to tonight's case. The thing with tonight's case is we are talking about teenagers, but we're talking about teenagers who were born in the late 90s and grew into the early 2000s. And so they grew with the technology. I was not part of that generation. I have moments where technology seems to be far beyond my skill level, but that's, where my kids and my husband come into play. They tend to teach me what I lack in knowledge. But for these girls, it's different. They grew up, they watched it happen, and where their parents were trying to learn, these kids they were young. So their minds were far more malleable. They could adapt to the changing. They could understand the order in which things needed to be done with technology. So once they got into high school, cell phones and social media were a huge part of who they were. Now, I didn't grow up with that. I didn't have that, hence my inability to technology sometimes. But this case, many of you have probably already seen it through social media or Oxygen or Dr. Phil or whatever. Many cases make their way through that. But this case just threw me because I was flabbergasted that two teenage girls could do the damage that they did. And what led to it and their MO was baffling. I mean, it just boiled down to the fact that they just didn't want to be friends with her anymore. That's it. Let me go ahead and introduce you to Skylar. Her name is Skylar Neese. She was the only daughter to Dave and Mary Neese, and she was born February 10th, 1996. Now, Mary and Dave were your typical blue-collar family, okay? They worked hard for the money. They lived paycheck to paycheck. You know, they skirted by paying their bills. There wasn't much extra. When there was extra, Skylar received it. They doted on their daughter. They loved her. She was shown love that was unconditional. She was raised in a special environment. Unfortunately, some people who come from a blue-collar background are not raised with parents who are always there. Either through they work too many jobs trying to pay rent, or they're so tired by the time they get done working that all they want to do is sit and have peace, and therefore neglect plays a role. But for Mary and Dave, they didn't allow that to happen. They doted on their daughter, and Skylar, she knew the meaning of unconditional love. It's said that Skylar is the mini version of her mother, Mary. She had these stunning baby blue eyes. If you see a picture of Skylar, you see these just ice eyes looking back at you. They're gorgeous eyes. And by the time she was a teenager, she was ringing them with coal black eyeliner. Just made the color pop even more. But she was the spitting image of her mother. When you look at her and you look at her mother, you can see, they're just a mini-me version. But don't get me wrong, that didn't mean that Skylar loved her father any less. As a matter of fact, she was your textbook definition daddy's girl. They played together and they played rough, and Skylar loved it. But Skylar also didn't let her dad walk around being all brute and macho. If he was doing something that Skylar felt was unjust, she'd call him out on it. That's the thing with Skylar. She was very passionate about the fact that she did not want to see somebody mistreated for any reason. How did it affect you? Was it really necessary for you to name call or bully or whatever the case may be? That's where Skylar stood up. She wasn't going to allow that to happen, and especially with her family. In 2000, when Skylar was just 4 years old, Mary, she was in a pretty bad car accident. She was on the interstate, and a semi hauling wood logs had missed its exit. And so it decided to stop and back up. And in the process, Mary could not get away from the semi fast enough, and the tractor trailer rolled over the top of her. And when she put her arm out against the steering wheel as just a muscle defense, you don't even think about it. It just happens. When you fall, your hands automatically go out to support you in the fall. Mary ended up shattering her forearm, and it required several surgeries and plates and bolts and screws. And she was lucky that the trucking company, not only did they take care of all of her medical bills, but they also paid her a little bit of restitution. Well, that was an extra allotted income into the Neese family. And so they were able to take their very first vacation as a family in 2000. And they chose living close enough to the East Coast to take Skylar to the ocean. And Skylar, she learned to love the ocean, but she did not like the ocean the very first visit. Her little body just, anytime she got up to go out into the water, the waves just knocked her over. She was a tiny little thing. I can't imagine her being very big as a child, because as a teenager, she was not a very big girl. She's just tiny little pocket size. So she eventually learned to love the beach, but on this vacation, she really loved the hotel pool, which most kids do. As a matter of fact, whenever we go out of town, that's probably one of the first things my kids ask. Does the hotel have a pool? Well, us being the parents that we are, never book a hotel without a pool because we know that's where our kids want to go. So that's where Skylar wanted to be. She loved it. And as they're getting ready to get in the pool, Dave learns just how fearless his daughter can be. Our children have all been to a point where they had the little arm floaties. Well, Skylar's had her arm floaties on, and she had this confidence and air about her that with those, everything was possible. And she told her dad, I can swim. I don't need your help. And he, Dave's like, no, hold on. Give me just a second. And as Dave is juggling his daughter, Mary's sitting back watching her very young child become headstrong. And next thing they knew, Skylar was in the water, just slapping the water surface and kicking, and her whole little body just jiggling. And she's showing her dad, I can swim, I can swim. And he was the typical dad, and he had a heart attack during the whole process. Poor Dave. But that's when they learned that Skylar, she would stop and she would evaluate the situation before she jumped in. She didn't do things in an uneducated manner. She looked at the situation, she evaluated the danger, and she evaluated whether or not she felt she had the capabilities to go through the situation. And when she decided that she did, well, off she went. She was gone. At an early age, Skylar, she learned where her morals were. I mean, like I said before, she didn't put up with you mouthing or, just popping off at the situation if it didn't directly affect you in some way, which is a good thing. I mean, she didn't stand for racial discrimination, sexual discrimination. She didn't stand for bigotry. She didn't stand for global warming. She had these set beliefs in her mind, and she would be quick to call you out if she felt you were violating any of those. Her dad often was on the receiving end of Skylar being like, now, how does this affect you, Dad? Why are you saying these things? How does this whole mostly it was him yelling at the TV during a sporting event. I mean, most guys do. However, I come from a family where the women watch football. So in my house, it's the women yelling at the TV because the football players are not doing what they need them to be doing. So she would be giving my mom and my nana earfuls. Now, how does that directly affect you? It's okay though. It's fine because that's a good thing. She had these character flaws. I call them flaws, but they're not necessarily a negative thing. These are very positive things for Skylar. She knew where she stood in the grand scheme of things, and she was going to make sure that in her power, you were not mistreated for something that didn't directly affect another person. This is a good thing. It's okay. Many say that because Skylar kind of grew up without the materialistic items in life, it kept her more grounded. And again, this would reflect back to her morals. She wasn't handed everything that she said, I want to. Mary and Dave didn't have that capability financially. However, when they could, they would give Skylar things. But because of this kept her grounded. It didn't let her soar above like most teenagers are that you just hand everything, over to. It gave her a way to stay in touch with that empathetic side, that compassionate side, and it poured over into her schoolwork. Skylar was an intelligent girl in every definition of the word. She was not stupid. Let's just put it there. She knew and she learned and she adapted. That way, her learning curve shifted as she got older. And because of this, Skylar's desire to become a lawyer as an adult made sense. At some kids, they want to be this thing, but in reality, they're cut from a different cloth, so they may not make it to be the president of the United States or, a surgeon or a lawyer or whatever. Some kids are just not made to be that, and that's okay. But for Skylar, that goal was very obtainable because intellectually, she was a brilliant child. We're all kids. We all go through the phase where you got to learn the street smarts. And some of us don't always pick up on it, and some of us over pick up on it. It's never the same for two people. When Skylar was in preschool, she met her very first best friend, Morgan Lawrence. And Morgan was very much like Skylar in the fact that she was also a single child. However, Morgan grew up a little more affluent than Skylar. That does not mean that Morgan wasn't in touch with her morality or wasn't in touch with her empathetic or compassionate side. Skylar and Morgan as a duo made a lot of sense. They kept each other on the straight and narrow. As Skylar got older, Morgan saw the changes happening, and she didn't like that about Skylar. She loved Skylar because Skylar was her friend. She'd always be her friend. But at that moment, the changes Skylar were making, Morgan didn't agree with. And that's okay. That happens. We move on, we grow, we adapt to the situation. But Morgan and Skylar were far more than anyone thought they would be. During preschool, they're like most preschoolers. You're my best friend, and 2 seconds later, I have another new best friend. But for these two, that was it for them. They were done looking. However, the summer between preschool and kindergarten happened, and much like young children do, they forgot about one another. But when kindergarten rolled around, the familiar face was there, and they just knew, I know you from somewhere, and we are going to be friends because I know you. I can't remember how I know you, but I know you. So Skylar and Morgan became inseparable. Morgan's mother would take Skylar home after school and keep her until Mary or Dave could get off work and come pick her up. This was Morgan's mother's way of helping out the nieces, and it was greatly appreciated. But it also allowed Skylar and Morgan to develop a more sisterly-like friendship to the point that they argued like sisters do. I grew up with a little brother. We argued. I can only imagine what it was like to grow up with a sister, because I'm pretty sure it could have been a lot worse. Because us girls are just catty. Let's just admit to that. We really are. With Morgan's mother taking Skylar home after school, it gave the girls more time to play. And, they developed that sisterly hood, but that also meant they fought like sisters. And most of the times, Morgan said she felt like Skylar would pick the fight, so that Morgan would be sent to her room and Skylar would be left to either play with the toys they were playing with or to be able to watch the television show she wanted to, whatever the case may be. And that is your typical only child syndrome kind of thing. They learn to share, but they tend to learn to share later than those who are raised with siblings. So it's give and take, but it doesn't mean that they're not incapable of it. However, Skylar was known to exhibit the only child syndrome more times than not. And sometimes it came out against her friends, and sometimes it came out against the people surrounding her and her friend. Morgan said that somewhere in the 5th grade, the girls learned that only about 5% of those people who become childhood friends actually go on to remain friends later in life. And Skylar and Morgan were dead set on being that 5%. They wanted to make sure their friendship would last a lifetime. So they made a pact that they would be each other's bridesmaids when it came time for them to get married. Skylar and Morgan didn't ever want to live a life where the other one wasn't a part of it. But in 1st grade, Skylar would make a new friend, not necessarily replacing Morgan, but adding to her pot of kids she could play with. And this was Daniel Hovatter. Now, Daniel His mom used Skylar's dad, Dave, as a handyman while her husband was deployed overseas in military contracts. So his dad's not around. Sometimes things need to be fixed, so Dave would come over and fix them. And when he did, he would bring Skylar along. And this allowed Daniel and Skylar to develop a really close relationship. And I would say they were more like brother and sister than boy and girlfriend, in the fact that Skylar became so close with Daniel that she would confide in him whenever she felt the need to get whatever it was off her chest. Now, sometimes Skylar would just have the conversation between her and the journal. Very rarely did she go outside of that unless it just really ate at her. And Daniel became the person that she would go to talk about these things. He seemed to understand Skylar a little bit more than Morgan. However, that didn't mean that Morgan was replaced. Skylar just liked to have her options available. Let me introduce you to Sheila Eddy. Sheila was born on September 28, 1995, to Tara and Greg Eddy. She was also the only child of Tara and Greg. And Tara and Greg would divorce early in Sheila's life, long before she would enter into school. But much like the Neeses, the Eddys were also a very blue-collar family. They worked hard for what they had, and when they did have a little bit extra, they went to Sheila. With Tara and Greg divorcing early, that left Tara to be a single mom. Sheila's dad was in a really bad automobile accident, much like Mary was. However, Greg suffered brain damage, leaving him partially crippled. And for Sheila, it was almost like she lost her dad. Even though he was still there was some definite mental deficits going on. And so this poor girl feels like she lost a parent, even with Greg still being there. Because Greg and Tara, they divorced. And Greg had these deficits that were now taking part in his life that he didn't have prior to the accident. And Sheila was not old enough to really understand what was going on. So she kind of went through a period where she just felt like she lost her dad. Now, Sheila and her mother sometimes would partake in church activities at the Kent Chapel. And the eerie thing about this is that chapel sits along the same stretch of road that Skylar would later be murdered on. And in this church, Sheila essentially gave her life to Jesus. Her and her mother went through a ceremony where she adorned this beautiful gold butterfly. And it was a way to just exhibit that she accepted the Lord Jesus Christ as her Savior. It's also about this time, she's about 7, that Sheila starts to exhibit some personality traits. Now, let me go ahead and just stop right here for 1 second. I'm not a licensed professional. I have no license to practice psychology. I don't have the education to diagnose somebody. I have very little classes under my belt. However, when going through this case and I looked at Sheila and you just kind of separate her from the story, you start to see things pop out for borderline personality disorder. Okay. The very exuberant things that she would do to put herself in the spotlight. Like one time in the middle of the restaurant, in the middle of eating dinner, she decided she was going to stand up. And she stood up for the rest of the dinner, eating, no matter what her mother said to her. She was not going to sit down because she wanted the entire restaurant's attention on her. This is somebody that has a definite personality disorder, but she very much walks the line of being a borderline personality disorder, a BPD. Again, not a licensed professional. Sheila's never been formally diagnosed with anything. And as long as she maintains, a non-violent or non-aggressive attitude, she doesn't really have to undergo one. So the moment she becomes a danger to herself or to those around her, then she will be required to undergo psychological testing. But as of right now, she didn't have to. So she's never been diagnosed, and I'm just a lay person who dabbles in true crime, so I don't carry enough clout to say she does have BPD. I'm just saying that she exhibits those traits far more than just narcissist or psychopath or sociopath, whatever you want to call it. There's more to it. There's more to Sheila Eddy's psyche than what meets the eye. I just don't have the ability to say what that is. Now let me introduce you to another person, Rachel Shoaf. Rachel was born June 10th, 1996 to Rusty and Patricia Shoaf. Now, as far as only child goes, Rachel was the only child of Rusty and Patricia. However, Rusty was married previously and had a son, and his wife passed away due to cancer. So when he met Patricia, he was a single father to a son. By the time Rachel came around, her stepbrother or half-brother, he was a teenager almost out of the home. And so he really didn't play a huge role. So, essentially, she was an only child and was raised as an only child. But Patricia and Rusty would see their relationship fail. So Rachel had the same characteristic of being an only child or having the only child syndrome, just like Skylar and just like Sheila. But she shared this other thing with Sheila that seemed to be far more stronger of a connection with the fact that her parents split just like Sheila's parents did. And so I think once they become a group of three, that's how those two tend to gravitate. Okay. Now, Rachel is a little different. She grew up white collar. Her father made a lot. He did good in his job. He made quite a bit of money. His family lived comfortably. And therefore, Rachel had a little bit different upbringing, and she was able to attend a St. Francis Catholic school through her elementary years and her junior high years. She just had a little bit of a different social circle than Sheila and Skylar had. Now, Skylar met Sheila in between the first and second grade, and they met at the Shack Neighborhood House, which was a community/activity center in Morgantown. And it's over that summer they developed their friendship and this unique bond between the two. Now, Sheila lived in Blacksville, and so at the time, Skylar's family was living in Cheat Lake. Now, I've looked at the map right around all of this, and they're relatively close to one another. I'm from a smaller town where 20 minutes is one of the bigger city. And so when looking at the map, that's how I compare it. These are little boroughs surrounding a larger town, Morgantown, and Blacksville and Cheat Lake. And those are all different little boroughs just outside. Nevertheless, on the weekends that Skylar would be spending the night with Sheila, Skylar would be dropped off at Tara's work by her parents so that Mary and Dave wouldn't have to make the 20-mile trip to Sheila's home. Where the two families could help each other out, they did. Now, when school started back up, Skylar would go home with Morgan every day after school until her parents could get off and come get her. And then every other weekend, when Sheila was home with her mother, Skylar would be riding back to Blacksville with Tara to spend the weekend with her friend Sheila. She divided her time amongst her friends, and how it was divided was up to Skylar. But in the end, Skylar and Sheila developed this really just naturalistic friendship, and they were bonded instantly to the point that you could kind of see Skylar's appearance start to change and gravitate towards Sheila's appearance. As early adolescence started to approach Skylar, so did the frequency of cell phones and their usage. Now, way back in time when cell phones first came around, we didn't have unlimited calls or unlimited texting. Texting was actually never free in the beginning. FYI, for those of you who didn't know, we paid per message sent. So, like, I have a teenage daughter. If I had to pay for every message she sent, good Lord, I could not afford it. I would have to sell off both kidneys and an arm and possibly half my brain just to pay the cell phone bill once a month. But by the time Skylar and Sheila were getting into the adolescence in life, texting became more frequent. Calls were more frequent. You weren't limited to such restrictions as some people were when cell phones first started coming around. It made life easier, but as with everything, cell phone companies were learning just how their product was going to be adapted. And teenagers took off with their cell phones, ran, and thus plunged us into the world of unlimited everything. So thank you, teenagers of the late 1990s, early 2000s. Now, Sheila had a phone, and there wasn't a whole lot of Tara's financial woes. And when going into the research of this, the big thing I have with stories is if they oversell the perpetrator more than they do the victim. And I mean, you've got your bigger cases like Bundy or Dahmer or Gacy, where you probably couldn't name a third of the victims. And those are very rare birds that come out of the true crime world. Most times when you're looking at just an everyday true crime, the victim is typically the one that is most spoke about, that is most evaluated. Their perpetrators you learn things about, but you don't learn everything. So Sheila, we knew she grew up with a single mom, but as far as the financial woes went, it was not clear. What was clear is that Sheila had a cell phone and Skylar had a cell phone, okay? But riddle me this, Batman. Skylar's parents did not have a landline. Neither one of Skylar's parents had a cell phone, but Skylar had a cell phone. And it said that the reason that Skylar had a cell phone is so that she could always be reached or she could always reach them. Now, me as a parent of today and not of their time frame seems a little asinine. How is she going to get a hold of you if you don't have a landline or a cell phone or even a pager? It would make more sense for the parents to, procure a landline first than a cell phone. But not my money, not my monkeys, not my circus, okay? I'm not judging you. I'm just saying the teenager had a phone, but there was no way to communicate with the parent. Now, the summer before Sheila moved to Morgantown, her and Skylar had pretty much become inseparable. And thanks to Sheila's mom's new boyfriend, Jim Clendenin, Jim, I'm sorry, I might have butchered your name, and I'm very sorry about that. Sheila's attitude changed in that dynamic of her mother having this boyfriend, okay? Her attitude increasingly grew out of control. Now, when Tara first started dating Jim, neighbors can report hearing Sheila and Tara getting into some very wild arguments in their home and outside of their home. But Sheila also was starting to grow accustomed to Jim and his money. See, Jim coming into Tara's life was beneficial to Sheila and Tara. Jim worked hard. He had money. He was able to provide those two with a life that they had struggled to get halfway to prior to Jim coming into their life. So Sheila hated the fact that Jim was going to replace her father, so to speak, in the marriage. But she didn't hate him enough to not accept the things he bought her. Unfortunately, it seems like Jim bought Sheila's affection. If she wanted it, he said okay. He treated Tara great from what I can, deduce from everything. But Sheila, she was just kind of the tag along, and she didn't like him. And the only way he knew to get her to like him was if he bought her thing. And Sheila was too narcissistic to not accept him. As she's screaming and hollering at her mother about a life decision she doesn't agree with, she's also willingly taking the money and whatever else he buys her. One of the neighbors say that they can even remember Sheila becoming so angry and arguing with one of Tara's boyfriends. It may have possibly been Jim. It wasn't Claire. But that neighbor can remember hearing Sheila saying something along the lines that Sheila would kill her mother. Now, we all have said in a spout of anger or without thinking, something along the lines of, I will kill you, okay? Why then sit back and deny it? We've said it. However, the difference is once the cloud of anger passes, we no longer revisit that thought, and most of us don't even remember saying those words, okay? However, for Sheila, it seems as though she focused in on that. Not that she ever did anything to Tara or put her mother's life at risk in any form or fashion. She didn't. However, when you look back, it looks very eerie. But, hindsight. Skylar's friendship with Sheila was special in the fact that it did not cross into very many other friendships. Morgan and Skylar didn't hang out with Sheila. Morgan didn't really care for Sheila. She would accept Sheila if that meant Skylar would come along. But Morgan's friends would not come along if Sheila was part of it. A lot of kids label her as controlling, as mean, as a bully, as everything under the sun that's not nice, okay? Nobody really, really, truly liked her. Daniel would put up with Sheila, and he would only tolerate her if Skylar was around. If Skylar was nowhere in the picture, he didn't have anything to do with Sheila, and Sheila had nothing to do with Daniel. Sheila only used the people that could benefit her in some way. That's who she kept in her circle of friends. But for whatever reason, Skylar and Sheila they were like super glue. They just stuck really well together. To the point that Skylar, you kind of noticed that her attitude was changing. Her mannerisms were starting to change. Just her overall behavior very much mimicked Sheila's. And not only did Morgan and Daniel see Skylar and these changes, so did Mary and Dave. But Sheila was kind of like family to them. Sheila didn't knock when she came over to the house. She just walked in and was like, hey guys. I'm sure she called them mom and dad, and she went back, and her and Skylar spent time together. But you couldn't help but notice the more time that Skylar spent with Sheila, the more she changed. In the end, it didn't matter. You could point all that out to Skylar. It didn't matter to her. She was not going to give up her friendship with Sheila for whatever reason, beyond anything that we could ever try to understand or know or fathom. Skylar saw something in Sheila to the point that she knew she needed Sheila in her life, okay? And we are not going to judge or berate her for making that decision at all. She had no way of knowing. By freshman year, Skylar was attending University High School, where she was living in Star City, which is just outside. It's one of those little boroughs. But she still qualified to be in attendance at University High School in Morganton. Okay. Rachel has always grown up in that community, just in a different social circle than Skylar and Sheila. But freshman year, Rachel and a bunch of her friends from the Catholic school transferred into the public school district, and this is where Skylar would meet Rachel, and they became fast friends. they really enjoyed each other's company, and Skylar had a knack for making new friends along the way. However, Sheila was always made time for, special time for, okay? And at this point, Sheila and her mother are still living outside of Morgantown, and so she is not within the same school district. But that will change. Rachel to University High School, where most of these kids had grown up together. Most of them knew each other. Rachel was an outsider. However, because she transferred in with a bunch of other girls and students from the Catholic school, she wasn't exactly a new girl. People knew of her, thanks to the Catholic school system and all those people that she grew up with. So when she entered into University High School, she wasn't necessarily the new girl. However, it was new and refreshing that Rachel was very talented when it came to singing and acting. Most people looked and heard, or if you just saw her practice acting or singing, you knew that she had this natural talent that someday could lead her somewhere great. And Rachel absolutely loved the drama department. That was something she was highly passionate about. And Skylar supported her in that. And that's what makes a great friendship right there, is supporting one another through their endeavors in life. So Skylar and Rachel, they make these quick friends. And when the news that Sheila and her mother are moving in with Jim in Morgantown reaches University High School, Skylar is ecstatic to bring Sheila in. And it's not long after Sheila moves to University High School that Sheila and Skylar and Rachel all become this trio of friends. And where you see one, you see them all. However, with Rachel joining Skylar and Sheila's friendship, they saw a shift in the group that nobody saw coming. Okay, it was a blindside. Adding Rachel into the equation shifted things around that nobody could have known prior to asking Rachel to join them. When Sheila first moved to University High School, one of the very first things she did was shift her schedule to match Skylar's the best as possible. Well, in doing so, that meant that she and Rachel also had a very matchy schedule. The girls almost had every single class together. And for them three, it was paradise. All three girls were very intelligent. All three were part of the honor society. They took part in the more advanced placement classes. None of them was lacking in the educational department. And where Skylar was very drawn to her education, to studying, to getting the best grades possible because she wanted to become a lawyer. And Rachel had this raw, natural talent for acting and singing. But then you had Sheila, and there was no direction for her in where she was going. Was she going to college? She didn't really know. Did she have a trade that she was exceptionally good at? Again, nobody really knew. Sheila was the oddball out. New kid in school. Unlike Rachel, she didn't transfer in with a bunch of kids. It was just her coming in. And she was popular at her old school, but here at University High School, things are a tad different. It isn't long before Sheila opens herself up to a wilder partying style. She's willing to smoke weed. She's willing to snort a line or two of coke. She's willing to swallow some oxy. And eventually, her willingness to engage in sexual activities make it even more fun at the parties, where Sheila lacks in the social skills to become the popular girl she was at her old high school. She then fills those holes with her willingness to do drugs, her willingness to have sexual encounters, anything she can think of that might lead her into being popular. However, when you're looking at it, you see that Sheila is a burnout. You see that she's sexually promiscuous. You can label that with whatever slang term you want to. I'm not going to. You don't see an equation for a popular child. You see an equation for a natural disaster coming. But in Sheila's mind, that made her popular. It wasn't long before the trio started seeing distrust in their group, or tension, or fighting. None of them were oblivious to what was going on and the way the atmosphere was changing between Skylar and Sheila and Skylar and Rachel and Sheila. That group of girls saw a shift, a discord that you couldn't ignore. Sheila shifted towards Rachel, and it seemed as though Rachel shifted towards Sheila. That left Skylar being the third wheel, the odd man out. That is, unless she could get her hands on some weed. And thanks to Daniel, that just meant that she had a connection. So more times than not, Skylar could provide the weed, and Sheila and Rachel let Skylar tag along because she's got the drugs. You want to have a good time. You want to smoke some pot. You want to forget about your day. You kind of have to accept the fact that Skylar's got the pot. In the spring of freshman year, Skylar, Sheila, and Rachel, they sneak out of their homes and they go for a joyride around Star City and Morgantown. Now, Morgantown has a very strict curfew, and that is for everybody under the age of 18. They are to be at home by 10 o'clock. Now, Skylar had a friend, Floyd Pancoast, and his friend, Brian Motes, both of which were over the age of 18, both of which could provide them with weed, both of which could provide them as a way of freedom from their ever-peering, parent eyes. So they agreed to go joyriding around town, knowingly breaking curfew. And when an officer spots a vehicle go past him with 5 very young-looking occupants, he pulls the car over. And Floyd and Brian, they're over the age of 18, so those two are left to go. However, Skylar, Sheila, and Rachel, well, they're all under the age of 18. Sheila and Rachel's dad are called from the police station, and they come and pick the girls up and then help sneak Sheila and Rachel back into their homes before their mothers can figure out what happened. Skylar has a different thing. There's no landline. There's no way to get a hold of her parents, which means an officer has to drive her home and knock on the front door and turn her over to the custody of her parents. Okay? Well, Skylar is one with a conscience, and in the short ride it takes to go from the police department to her apartment where her parents are, Skylar is in full on panic mode. She's crying, she's berating herself. She can't believe she would be that stupid and break the rules and get caught. So Dave and Mary, they lecture her, but they can see that their daughter has kind of punished herself enough to the point where Skylar is instructed to not sneak out again, and they hope that she learns her lesson, but they're pretty sure that getting caught by the police and Skylar's ride back home was enough punishment for her to learn her lesson. The summer before sophomore year in 2011, loyalties kind of changed, and Skylar and Sheila's friendship was now the lesser of the group, and things really the little things start to add up here, and you see how this group of girls just crumble. And it starts with the event that happened on August 16th, on or about that date. Skylar and Sheila are invited to stay the night at Rachel's house for the very first time since the group met, okay? And they are no stranger to drinking, to doing drugs, to giggling and having a good time. So this isn't out of routine for them. They stay the night, they're up, they're laughing, they're listening to their music, they're taking selfies. And when Patricia, Rachel's mom, goes to bed, they break out the liquor that they have managed to get their hands on and they start to get drunk. This is something you see with teenage kids. I'm not a teenage child. They tend to test their waters. They tend to dabble in things they know they shouldn't be, but feel like they have the power to come out okay unscathed on the other side. And drinking is one of those things. So it wasn't uncommon for them to drink. However, this night, things took a different turn. So the girls, they're drinking, they're laughing, they're just having a good time. Then they start kissing each other. And things lead further, but Skylar, she's okay with the kissing part. She's okay with the experimenting that part of it. But anything further than that, she doesn't want to be a part of, okay? But Sheila and Rachel, they're okay with taking it further. And Skylar, with this being her first time staying the night at Rachel's house, she does not feel comfortable getting up and leaving the room and letting Sheila and Rachel do whatever it is they are going to do. So instead, Skylar's drunk and she's mad and she's having to watch her two friends have sex. That's what happens. Rachel and Sheila, and they strip down. They litter the floor with their clothes that they have taken off, and the two engage in oral sex with one another. It's also said that they do more than that. If you really want to know, go look it up. I'm not going to go into any more detail. Just know that they had a sexual encounter, and it's this point, it's this date, it's this action that really set this group of friends in a whole new journey. Okay? After Rachel and Sheila get done doing whatever it is that they decided they were going to do that night, they all crawl into bed to go to bed. It's late, they're tired, and Skylar lays down, and Rachel lays down, and Sheila lays down. But somewhere in the back of Sheila's mind, she decides she is going to cuddle with Rachel. So she pushes at Skylar and tells her to move and get out of the way. She is going to cuddle with Rachel. Well, Skylar doesn't like being pushed. Sheila doesn't really like being told what to do as far as demanding the way that Sheila is demanding. So she fights back. Plus, she's drunk. She's inebriated. So she's tolerating a lot less than she normally would. Well, Patricia has to come into the room and she has to break up Sheila and Skylar twice that night. And it's safe to say they are no longer welcome to stay the night back at the Shoaf's residence. But it's that activity, it's that encounter between Rachel and Sheila that just changes. And Skylar is being pushed further and further and further to that outer circle. And no matter how hard she grips, she can't stay still. She can't hold her ground in this friendship. And she's starting to become the one that, you're on the outside, okay? And it's at this point that Rachel could realize that she was gay. And not that this is a bad thing by any means. If she's happy, that's great. That's what it comes down to. You need to be happy. However, Rachel has been raised as a very Catholic girl. You are not to be gay in Catholic religion. It is not accepted. It could be different now, but during this time, it's not. During this time, LBGT, the movement, is just getting some traction, and it's just now getting up off the ground. And when your child in the late 2000 or early 2000s come to you and say they're gay, it's not like it would be today if your child comes to you and tells you, I'm gay. and you look at your child and be like, okay, what's the news? Because we all knew that. It's not that way for her, and she's terrified that she has figured out that she would much rather have a girlfriend versus a boyfriend. And Sheila, being the narcissist that she is, holds on to the fact that Rachel's struggling with her sexuality. And if she keeps playing this way, which sure, why not? She's had sex with other people before to be accepted. So if she continues to have sex with Rachel, then she will become more important in Rachel's life. See where I'm going with this? Sheila twists the whole situation. Whether or not Sheila's really gay, I don't know. She probably is one that is fluid and will change her sexuality based off of how far it'll get her with that current situation. That's how I feel Sheila is. I feel like she plays to the situation rather than partake in a situation that plays to her characteristics. Just going to throw that out there. If you aren't picking up on how I feel about Sheila, where have you been for the last half hour? This child, and that's what they all are at this point. This child, she's a child, manipulates the situation to where she becomes numero uno in somebody's life because she doesn't feel like she is in her mother's life anymore. Her mother's married. She has a whole new husband. She's not number one there. She is not number one when she realizes Skylar has all these other friends. And somewhere in the back of her head, when they didn't attend school together, I guess Skylar walked around just not talking to anybody because her only friend was Sheila. I don't know. But in Sheila's mind, that may probably be what she thought. And when she gets over to university, high school, and she sees that Skylar has other friends, that Sheila's not number one in her life, and then she meets Rachel, and I don't know if she figures out that she's gay prior to this event, or if it's during this event she realizes that she's gay, and she's like, well, I can get behind this. And then I'll be number one in your life because I don't seem to be number one in anybody else's life. I think that's where that situation is. Rachel is battling with an internal struggle, and Sheila is figuring out if she plays her cards right, she'll get exactly what she wants. She'll be the center of attention. Now, here's the thing with this group, and it will play a huge part for the rest of this case in its entirety. Okay, Twitter. I am a newbie to Twitter. I actually had to go out and make a whole account for this case alone. I've heard of Twitter. I've seen, obviously, if you've been around the block for the last 4 years, you have seen the tweets that are making huge plays in the celebrity world, in the political world, just everywhere. Okay. Well, for this group of girls, Skylar, Rachel, and Sheila, they use Twitter social media. It's not MySpace, which is where social media for me began. It's not Facebook, where I am now. It's not Instagram. Instagram was still kind of new when the girls had their Twitter, and they had Instagram, but they took to Twitter far more. And so we are going to be going through quite a few tweets between the three girls that happened in the span of about 11 months. It doesn't take long before the girls decide how they're going to handle this situation, because Skylar now knows a secret, and Rachel doesn't want the secret out, and Sheila wants to maintain being number one. So let's follow Rachel and fix this whole fiasco that's going on. Okay. On August 21st, Skylar tweets out that she's learned a secret. And she tweets, quote, "It's almost ridiculous how I somehow find out everything." Now, here's the thing I've learned about Twitter. And I'm going to share my knowledge with you. You can say very passive-aggressively one-line tweets, and one is left to speculate who you're talking about. There's also this thing called subtweeting, which is the social media equivalent to talking behind someone's back. I'm still not fluent in anything Twitter, so if I get it wrong, I apologize now. I am simply going based off of this case and this case only. Now, Skylar takes to Twitter again on August 21st to blow off some more steam, posting, quote, "I for real need to quit wishing death on people. Hashtag that's terrible. Hashtag karma's a bitch." It's not necessarily that she took to Twitter just to say something. I feel like that the reason Skylar tweeted out this was so that she would have some self-accountability. How she needs to quit thinking so negatively. And if she puts it out there that she needs to change the direction of her thoughts out on social media, she'll feel more obligated to do so. There's several groups that get together for either weight loss or self-improvement or whatever the case is, where you have accountability through social media with another person. So I kind of feel like that's might be where Skylar's coming off with this tweet. I'm not going to psychoanalyze every single one of them. I'm going to tell you the ones that I think partake or are very pertinent to the case, and we'll go from there. Like I said, this whole new world for me. But just in case you're wondering, you can go follow the True Crime Librarian on Twitter now. On August 28th, Skylar changes the tones in her tweets, and it seems that Sheila is in her crosshairs once again, and Rachel's on the sidelines kind of playing to each side how she wants to. Skylar tweets out, quote, "Last time at Sheila, hate you." You can go get on Twitter if you want, and you can maybe possibly get far enough back on Sheila's Twitter to see some stuff, but you're going to be more successful with Skylar's Twitter. Now, all while Skylar and Sheila are kind of airing out their dirty laundry, Sheila, Skylar, and Rachel are tweeting each other back and forth playfully, with Rachel masterfully staying out of most of Skylar and Sheila's drama online. So it's really hard to decipher high school, just FYI. When I was in high school, I felt it was impossible, and now I'm an adult and I feel like it's a whole new language. So I watch Skylar and her mentality change from she's not going to let Sheila rule the school, or rule her at least, but at the same time, she doesn't want to lose that friendship. So her tweets, they kind of play back and forth. Very confusing. On September 5th, Skylar tweets out that, quote, "She found out she's got no soul, but it really doesn't bother her," with a little heart emoji. On September 6th, Skylar subtweets again against Sheila and Rachel, but it's this tweet that is believed to really kind of shift the dynamics just for that last final time in their friendship, and puts into motion the chain of events that would eventually end up costing her her life. She tweets, quote, "I tell the whole school all the shit I have on everyone, but it's a lot. Hashtag if I could get away with it." And the secret that Skylar's playfully taunting to tell right here is what happened between Rachel and Sheila on August 11th. Now, do I think that Skylar would ever say anything? No. Do I think she would use it against the? Yes. That's just how high school girls are. That's just how girls are in general. She knows Rachel's upbringing with her family and the religion, and how Rachel being gay could potentially tear apart all of that. They also are kind of playing with, fire, and this secret that they all harbor together. It allows Skylar, knowing it, and Skylar's background and her family, all of that plays the hand to where Rachel shifts towards Sheila, because Sheila's not the one saying she's going to out her. Sheila's the one that continues to feed that curiosity inside of her as far as experimenting sexually, how it goes. It's Skylar who's taunting to take all that away. And that's how Rachel and Sheila go from playfully talking about unfriending Skylar to planning how they're going to murder the girl who just a couple months before was their best friend, part of their ride or die. When you're looking at this with eyes that were not entangled in the girls and their drama, we all ask the same question, and I know you are right now. Why didn't they just go their separate ways? Okay. Why didn't they just unfriend one another? But flip the switch for a moment, okay, and look at it from a teenager's point of view. I'm not condoning what Skylar, Rachel, and Sheila all did. I'm definitely not condoning what Sheila and Rachel did. All I'm saying is if you flip the switch, you go back in time just a little bit to when you were in high school, unfriending a friend that has been a friend for as long as, a whole year and a half, it's not as easy, especially when you have secrets that you're afraid that they will just spill. You don't want to be my friend? Well, I'm going to tell the whole school that you two had sex together. You think those are things that would end your life, that you could never possibly come back from that. They're very concrete in their way of thinking, even though at this point in time in life and development, they should be very critical in their thinking, or at least starting to be. But you can see when teenagers make very permanent solutions to very temporary situations, the concrete thinking is still strong. Now look at it from this way. Skylar, she has her learner's permit, but she doesn't have her driver's license, and she knows there's no way with her family and their financials that she is going to have a car when she gets her license. Rachel was late to the game in getting her learner's permit, so she doesn't have her license or a car. It is said that she was going to get a car until her attitude started changing when she started hanging out with Sheila more and more. Well, guess who has the car out of the group? Sheila. And that's simply because she has a stepfather who was willing to give her whatever it is she wanted just to shut her up. So Sheila having a car, this is these girls' only chance at freedom and away from the watchful eyes of parents. So I think this is another reason that shit is being put up with from Sheila and her running her mouth. You want to have a way to get away. We can remember when we got our license and we couldn't understand why our parents wouldn't just overturn the keys to us and let us run wild and free. And you don't learn that until you have a teenager, and then you can think of a million different things they could do other than potentially destroy a car. But in the end, you have all these trivial things that keep the group from just disbanding and Skylar go her own way and Sheila and Rachel go their own way. You have a secret, you have this freedom through access of having a car, you have a history, you can't picture life where you're not all a part of it. All of these play a role into the simple reason why they don't just unfriend her. That's the blunt and obvious answer to that. Now, in October of 2011, and it's speculated on or about the 6th of October, and this is based off of what Mr. Jimchek is lecturing in sophomore biology. And the reason why this date can almost be pinpointed down, because when you hear a conversation, most people don't recollect, oh yeah, that happened on this day. No, see, school was abruptly called to an end on the 6th of October because the kids were told there was a bomb threat or something. No, there was a gas leak. That's what it was. There was a gas leak in the school, and so they had to let everybody out. However, a body was found of a woman behind the school, and this led to the DNA and forensic conversation that ended up happening in Mr. Dimchek's biology class that day. And this is why most people can remember This is the particular class that Sheila and Rachel make uneasy remarks in. This is the only class that Sheila and Rachel have that Skylar is not a part of. And at the back of the classroom, Sheila and Rachel are snickering and giggling and just doing their own thing. Mr. Dimchek's at the front of the room, telling them to hush, to pay attention, your typical teacher-student conversations. When Sheila turns to the kid sitting behind her, Nick Tomasky, and asks him, quote, "Hey, do you know how to dispose of a body?" And Nick blows the question off, doodling on his paper, not listening to the lecture, and could really care less what Sheila is saying to him. And he says something along the lines of, "Go watch the show Breaking Bad. They show stuff like that on there." And Sheila, being the very brazen person that she is, she says, "Well, we want to figure out what to do with Skylar." And Nick just stares at her after that remark, like, "Are you trying to be funny?" And Rachel kind of laughs, and she's like, "No names." She chastised Sheila, but Sheila's like, "He ain't gonna say shit." Now, it's according to the students in the class that day outside of Nick, they can remember Rachel and Sheila talking very poorly of their supposed best friend. Now, the school hasn't been blind to dynamic shifting in Rachel, Sheila, and Skylar. They see it. Where once the group was, if you saw one, you saw all three. Now the school knew if you saw Rachel, you saw Sheila, and if Skylar wasn't around, they weren't talking nice about her. It was all behind the back kind of thing. So the school was very in tune with this dynamic shift. However, the sinister conversation of what to do with Skylar's body in Mr. Dimchek's biology class didn't go unnoticed, and it didn't go undocumented, because Sheila gets the audacity to raise her hand and ask Mr. Dimchek, quote, "What kind of acid would you dispose of a body in?" End quote. And it's at that comment that Mr. Dimchek's had enough, and he sends Sheila and Rachel to the office. Now, he says, looking back, had they said anything in regards to Skylar, he would have been duty-bound to file a report and see that this be taken further than a simple, "y'all need to go to the office" kind of thing. He swears that Skylar's name was never brought up in the conversation. And it may be so. Mr. Dimchek may have been lecturing and may not have picked up on the fact that the two were talking about Skylar. But the surrounding student body did pick up on it, and they did have something to say about it. So, I'm not calling the teacher a liar by any means. I know that teachers can tune students out so that they can continue to teach, especially very disruptive ones where it's just like, I'm picking my battle, and my battle's not to get into it with you over you not paying attention. Okay? Even though most teachers, 99.9% of them, want you to pay attention in class. So, if you're a high school student listening to this, please pay attention in class. Don't piss them off. However, Skylar and Rachel, they're sent to the office, and they go to the office, and then they're sent back. And to the students, it looks like there was no consequences to the conversation that Sheila and Rachel were having. Well, Nick, he decides, well, he's not going to just sit back and not say anything. So after class, he figures out where Skylar is, and he goes to Skylar and he says, "Hey, during biology today, Sheila and Rachel were talking about killing you and what to do with your body." And Skylar just kind of laughs and, "Oh yeah, haha, they were probably just playing that would you rather game that we play sometimes." But she says that she will talk to them about it. Nobody in that class that day thought that what they had heard in the conversation between Sheila and Rachel was the birth of a murder plot. But when you look back, it's at that point these two decide, well, I don't want to unfriend her because I don't want her to accidentally tell anybody I'm gay. But hey, let's kill her because that seems better than being gay, even though both are a sin in your church. Now, when Skylar confronts Sheila and Rachel about what Nick had told her, Sheila and Rachel are like, "Oh, he smokes too much pot," and that's it. They leave it at that, and Skylar doesn't press the issue any further. But in November, Skylar's subtweets are constantly showing her as a friend in fear of losing her best friend. She could see Sheila and Rachel's relationship getting closer, but in the end, she was hanging on to whatever friendship she was offered from Sheila. And she says that by saying things like, quote, "Those songs that remind you of how it used to be, #happens for a reason," end quote. Or, quote, "Every time I see people talking about how sad it is to have your best friend slip away, I get more grateful I never have to worry about it. #I love you because I couldn't imagine life without you," end quote. Now, it does not go unnoticed that Skylar does not tweet one word about Sheila or Rachel from November 29th of 2011 to December 9th of 2011. She is radio silent on her Twitter. This is very peculiar. There is nothing going back in evidence or in hearsay or in gossip that could speculate what happened during that time. Just know that 11 days, Skylar says nothing about the drama between her and Sheila. It does not mean that Sheila and Skylar weren't fighting, because they were. Rachel, as she's at practice one night for her role in A Midsummer Night's Dream, Rachel takes a phone call from Sheila, and they are doing the old three-way call-in where one of them stays on mute and listens to the conversation. Rachel is added into the call, and she is on mute. And she puts her phone on speaker so that another student can hear what's going on. And Skylar and Sheila are going at it. They're at each other's throats, saying some of the most hurtful things they can say to one another. And at first, Rachel is crying because she can't believe her friends are fighting like this, and she just hates it. But then you could blink, and now she's laughing, going, "Did you hear what she said? Oh my God, can you believe she said that?" This girl, I don't know. There's probably some mental deficits there as well. But she does not display just overly exuberant amounts of personality disorder. I think more of what comes from Rachel is her experimentation with her sexuality. And I think that's where Rachel comes from. Where Sheila displays more of mental personality disorders, I think Rachel's is just good old fashioned. I'm not really sure if I'm gay or not. Peers are starting to notice that Rachel and Sheila's friendship has changed. Because when Skylar's not around, Rachel and Sheila are touching. They're playfully pushing one another or hugging on each other. And if they're smoking pot, well, Rachel damn near climbs in Sheila's lap just to get some contact between the two of them. And sometimes their friends or the people at the party or their peers or whatever, they question whether or not the two have entered into a relationship but had just kept it very hush-hush. Like I said, LBGT is starting to get some traction, so it's not uncommon to see teenagers test those waters and be like, I think I could be gay for this person. And so the affection starts to come out. The PDA starts to come out, especially when they're inhibited in their way of thinking. And it's accepted. Socially, kids are more apt to accepting something like a shift in sexual orientation dynamics than somebody who for 50 years had different dynamics and now are expected to flop that. It's a little bit more difficult. Not impossible, just a little bit more difficult. So they don't see Rachel and Sheila having some taboo relationship. They're like, oh, hey, cool. I think they're experimenting. That's great. Anyways, back to our conversation. I think that's why it didn't go any further. That's why there was no more further questioning. But looking at this, you're going, okay, you two couldn't keep your hands to yourself, which let the whole school kind of know that there might be something between you two, but yet you claimed that that secret getting out was part of the reason that you killed your best friend. 2 plus 2 don't equal 4 here. In January of 2012, 6 months prior to Skylar's murder, she uploads a video to the internet, and it's just kind of a video showing how close-knit the trio could be. And in the video, Sheila is front and center, and she's whining, saying, she didn't pee on herself. That's the great popsicle that left the couch wet and soaking into the pants of Rachel, who sat nearby. And you can see Sheila taking leadership in the group. You can see just by the way her body language is, by the way she talks, just her overall who she is. You can see she is the leader of the pack. And then she's standing there, and her arms and her display is very wide, and arms are flinging, and she has a mixing spoon in one hand, and she's like, I didn't pee on the couch. And Rachel's like, well, why am I wet? I'm way over here on the couch. And Sheila's like, no, you remember you said that looks like a grape Kool-Aid stain. And before you know it, that conversation is over, and Sheila has a whole new one going, and she's playing the game. Would you rather? And suddenly she fires off, quote, would you rather suffocate or get shot? And Rachel says shot, and Skylar says shot. And then Rachel says, wait, depends on where. And Sheila says, in the head. And both Rachel and Skylar say in unison, shot. There would be no suffering at all, Rachel adds. So Sheila adds a new one, eaten by ants or suffocated. And both Skylar and Rachel agree, suffocated. And Sheila says, drowning or suffocated. And both Rachel and Skylar agree again, suffocated. Even though Skylar points out it's almost the same thing, and Sheila says, I know, but it's not. Because that's not the game we're playing, Skylar. I want to know. And looking back, are they testing waters of how they're going to take her out? Like playing against her biggest fears? In March of 2012, we are showed the world more of what kind of friendship Sheila and Skylar have transformed into. And Sheila, her cousin, Shayna, and Skylar, they decide they're going to go to the movies there in Morgantown. And they go into the theater, and the three find a spot in the dark theater. And Sheila, being who she is and needs to be center of attention, sits in the middle between Skylar and Shayna. And Sheila's texting somebody. And Skylar says, who are you texting? And Sheila's like, none of your business. And Skylar's like, is it Rachel? And she's like, no, it's none of your business. And Skylar has this desire to know exactly who Sheila is talking to, and Sheila's not going to tell her. And this is where you can kind of see Skylar's attitude has shifted. She's not typically this angry person, but the more she is subjected to Sheila and Rachel's humility, the more aggressive she becomes. And so she reaches for Sheila's phone. She's going to figure out who she's talking to one way or another. But Sheila is very quick and slaps her hand away. And Skylar decides, no, I'm not putting up with this. And she punches her or half slaps her. Her hand's not really closed all the way, but it's not really open. So it's not a slap and it's not a full-on punch. So Sheila's stunned, but in the end, she stands up and she calls Skylar a bitch, and Skylar says, go fuck yourself. And there's patrons in the movies going, hey, you two get your crap together. And they're looking at Shayna to be like, hey, corral your friends. By this point, Sheila's out of the theater, and Shayna's like, let's go, Skylar. And Skylar, she ends up losing her flip-flop along the way, and they all have to get down and find it. But eventually, they leave the movie without ever seeing the movie, all because Skylar demanded to know who Sheila was talking to, and Sheila, she wasn't going to have it. She wasn't going to tell her. I'm talking to whoever I want to, and I don't have to tell you who I'm talking to. You're not my mama. And Shayna calls Skylar out for hitting Sheila, and Skylar's defense is she was being a bitch. Well, Skylar, at this point, you were the aggressor. Sheila is who she is. She's gonna do these things out of spite just to get a rise, and you fed completely into the game. And I hate that. I hate that you see Skylar, who stands up for the underdog, who is the champion of those who cannot stand up for themselves, turn into a person so aware of her self-consciousness that she can't not be a part of the circle. Now, at this point in the group dynamic, Skylar's friend Morgan is starting to compare notes with another friend of hers that was also friends with Rachel. And they come to the conclusion that both girls are acting outside of their normal. And when you look at your common denominator, it's Sheila. And all the kids, Morgan and Rachel's friends that were not friends with them, all say Sheila was the bad seed. She was the controlling one. She was the mean one. And it's not to go without saying that she's perfect or that Rachel's perfect or that Skylar's perfect, because none of them are. There's been times where one of the girls has been the aggressor to Sheila and provoked the response that they've gotten, but 9 times out of 10, Sheila's just giving you the response that she wants in the way she wants. Now, before you go defending Sheila or Skylar or Rachel, I want you to take a look back on yourself in high school and look at the fact that you're willing to conform in some degree to stay a part of your group of friends or to climb the social pyramid of popularity. So look at how you changed just so you could be part of the popular group or at least stay friends with your group. They were doing things you didn't necessarily want to be doing, but you did them just so nobody thought any lesser of you. So that's where these girls are. Skylar's hanging on by her fingertips to a friendship that has been part of her life since 2nd grade. And Rachel is somebody that she truly liked prior to Sheila becoming part of their group. So there's this dynamic there. Then you have Rachel holding on to the fact that she doesn't want anything said about who she is or what she likes until she figures it out solely for herself. There's that. And then you have Sheila, who loves to be the center of attention, who moved into university high school as the new kid and no longer having that popular status she once did at her old school. So, none of these girls, I would say, are acting in a manner that would supersede them. It's not what they did. It's not how they acted prior to all of this happening. But here they are. They are making decisions based off of actions that they have no realm of viewing the long term in. Now, are any of them doing something that demands a consequence as harsh as murder? No. I don't care if Sheila and Skylar got into knockdown dragouts every other day. Neither one of those girls deserved a murder. So, is there nitpicking? Is there arguments? Is there pettiness? Is there cattiness? Is there drama? Yeah, there's all of it. Check, 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 check. But none of that leads to the fact that somebody had to die. And unfortunately, the clicks and the popularity that you work so hard for in high school, they follow you out of high school. All you're doing in high school is preparing for the adult world, where knowing the right person, running around with the right group of people only helps you climb your career pyramid. It helps you as far as who you know and what you can get done and how people view you and how that comes back and plays a part in whether or not you're selected for the promotion or not. All of that stuff still happens in the adult world. We jokingly say when we graduate, thank God we're all away from this high school drama, but in reality, that was nothing compared to what it is as an adult. Some people just never learn. In May of 2012, we have a couple things that happen, and we are right up to about 2 months prior to Skylar being murdered. And in or on around the 10th of May, Skylar does another one of those subtweets saying, quote, obsessive girlfriends and ex-girlfriends are my favorite. Congrats on looking fucking pathetic, end quote. Maybe Skylar was not oblivious to what Sheila and Rachel's relationship was, as many thought. Typically, Sheila and Rachel didn't exhibit their touchy-feely behavior unless Skylar wasn't around. However, it does not mean that Skylar has no ears and does not hear the gossip that's going around about them and the way they act. Is it obvious that this may be what she's subtweeting to? Yeah, probably. We can only speculate. There's no names, there's no mentions. So that's the thing with this case. There's so many pieces you have to glue together in order to get the story. And you can look at this 10 different directions and get 10 different stories. And I think that's why I'm so drawn to this case. For one. For two, I think that's the reason I'm having such a hard time getting the story across to y'all. I feel like tonight has been a lot of talking in circles, and it's been unclear and probably not my most well-presented case, but that's because no matter which angle you come in at with this case, you see a different story. In the end, it all boils down to, they couldn't make a grown-up decision, but piecing together these tweets and these subtweets and these three-way phone calls, it's all very subjective. And I wanted to bring this case to y'all. I wanted to give you this because it's so interesting. It's a different MO. It's a different perpetrators. It's not your typical true crime. It's different. But it's just hard to glue down a story that makes a picture of the whole thing, because it just doesn't fit together perfectly every time a person looks at it. I look at it, I see one way. You can look at it, you can see a completely and totally different story. In the end, our characters are the same and the outcome's the same. But how you put that together, I guess, is based off of the way you see things. And I feel like I've talked in circles all night long through this first half of this case, and we're not even to the point that, most people listen to true crime for. Because I feel like there's so much explanation needed behind every little catty tweet. I don't know, it's surreal. And I'm going to try and wrangle myself in. No guarantees. Just bear with me. Let me vent or talk in circles. But this is a very interesting case. Now, about a week before school gets out, Rachel does something for the first time that I've seen throughout this case. Most times, it's Rachel and Sheila talking about how they don't like Skylar, how they want to kill her. It's them together as a group. Rachel, she steps out on her own, and she's studying with a friend who will remain unnamed at their request. And Rachel brings up saying, I can't stand Skylar. And this friend of Rachel's is like, but I thought y'all were all kind of friends. I thought it was like you, Sheila, and Skylar. And Rachel's kind of explaining, we don't really like her, but we can't really unfriend her because she's kind of mean and we don't want her to tell our secrets. And for me, I'm going to be like, well, what's your secret that you want, That's who I am. I'm very nosy in that aspect. It's not a great quality. It's a fatal flaw in life for me. But that I wouldn't have been like, oh, y'all aren't friends anymore. I'd be like, hey, what was the secret? So maybe that's the true crime nerd in me. I need to know all your dirty little secrets. prior to this moment, I feel like everything was Sheila led. Even though that there was that underbelly of Rachel not really sure where she stood sexual orientation wise, now I feel like Rachel is standing out on her own leg. But if she could get away from Sheila, I'm not sure that she would come to the same conclusion as Sheila was coming to, in which Skylar had to die. I will admit, Skylar had a little bit of an attitude that needed adjusted, and she needed to learn how to repurpose her anger. But killing her is not the answer to either one of those problems, okay? Even if she's being mean, even if she speaks her mind, even if she ultimately does not like having Rachel and Sheila go on without her, she would live. Each day would get easier and easier for her not having those two as her friends. Life would be okay. But back to the true reason they just couldn't stop being friends with her is she knew that Sheila and Rachel were far more than the BFF kind of thing. She had a good Catholic girl in Rachel who raised to be a straight heterosexual woman, but in reality she was leaning more and more towards being gay, and she feared that she would have to live life where her family wouldn't accept her. I feel like that is the biggest MO in this whole thing. We can go with, we just didn't like her anymore. You could do that. Does it make a lot of sense? No. Do everybody's MO make a lot of sense to us? No. But I think there's just more to it for at least Rachel's side. Sheila, she's probably, I just don't like her anymore. I could very easily see when you watch Sheila during the court, you can get on YouTube and you can watch them in court. She's just very like, I don't give a crap. I don't care. Whatever. Oh, you want to sentence me to life? Great, cool. Oh, her family's here crying? Cool. Hey, how y'all guys doing? Yeah, I know I come into your house and I treated y'all like family and y'all treated me like family and I killed your kid, but hey, cool. You know, she just had this air of cockiness to her and I didn't like it. Once the three were out of school at the beginning of June, Skylar and Sheila, they head off to the beach. Now, the last few years, Skylar has been going with Sheila and her family to the beach each summer. And this summer was going to be no different. So they go off. A couple days after they go to the beach, Rachel goes off to church camp. And so everybody has kind of gone their respectable ways. But this year, the beach vacation does not go well at all. Sheila and Skylar are basically at each other's throats the entire time. Now, no one knows what they fought about. You can only kind of speculate, and some people have said that Sheila tried to do something with Skylar, and Skylar got mad, and then Sheila got mad. Like I said before, Skylar was very okay with just kissing each other, but anything beyond that, she was not okay with. And it had Sheila pushed her into an uncomfortable position, I could see that causing an argument. But that's just speculation. We may never know what happened between those two girls on that trip. And it's something that Sheila may take with her to the grave. We may never know. We do know that by the time they got home from their beach vacation, Sheila had decided Skylar needed to die. And when Rachel got home from church camp on June 9th, Sheila let her in on her finality of decisions. Skylar had to die. And Rachel was like, I don't know what I missed, but cool, yeah, I'm down with it. So the two, they're brooding with the when, where, and how do we get rid of her? Now, Skylar returns to Twitter in a one-person narrative argument on June 9th, and this happens over several little brief clicks of the enter button. At 5:50 a.m., Skylar tweets, "You're just as bad as the bitches you complain about." And then 5:50 a.m., just a few seconds later, "and a liar." Then at 5:51, quotations, "love." Then at 5:52, Well, now I'm too fucking annoyed to sleep. At 6:13, yeah. 6:14, fuck you. At 6:15, and no, I do not type like that. At 6:27, just know, I know. Seeing how Sheila and Skylar had just got home from a beach vacation that did not go well, which they argued the entire time, we can deduce that she's having a one-person argument with Sheila, but there's no name. There's no shade thrown there as far as a name goes. On June 10th, Rachel's birthday. Instead of Rachel celebrating birthday like a normal child, her and Sheila are starting with step number 1 in the plan to kill Skylar. And they get on the internet and they search for the best ways to kill someone. And since neither one of the girls were very experienced with firearms, they decide that they're going to stab her. And they look even further and they learn that they need to sever her jugular vein to make sure that they get the job done correctly. The jugular is a major vein back to the heart carrying carbonated blood, okay? If you sever that, the circuit is broken. The blood can't make its way back to the heart, so the heart can't pump new blood into the lungs, oxygenate it, and then pump it through the rest of the body. You have a hole in your circuit. It's not going to work. She'll bleed out. So the girls have learned, we're going to stab her, and you got to go for the jugular, okay? So step 2, what are they going to do with Skylar once she's dead? They go over the acid scenario again, but seeing as how neither of them knew what kind of acid or how much acid, they step away from that plan. Well, Sheila is an avid watcher of Law and Order, SVU, all of that. I saw in there you can feed a body to a pig and they'll eat the whole thing. So they start knocking around the idea of feeding Skylar to a pen of pigs, which isn't impossible. Sheila's dad's family, it backs up to a bunch of farmland. And so there's several farms where pigs are being raised that they could do this with. However, getting Skylar's body into the pig pen without waking a farmer, without being noticed, it just was too risky for them. So they decide they're going to bury her. Okay. So they've got the how. They've got what they're going to do with her afterwards. And now they need to know where. And back to Sheila's dad his family owning a bunch of land. There was a particular spot the girls would go just the other side of the West Virginia-Pennsylvania border and go smoke pot. So Sheila and Rachel decide that's where they're going to do it. They're going to take Skylar up there on the premise that they're going to smoke pot and get high and just have a good time, stab her, bury her, and come back home like nothing ever happened. They're done. There's the plan. Foolproof. Perfect murder. On July 5th, 2012, Skylar gets home from work about 10:15 from her shift at the local Wendy's. She goes in, she takes a shower to get the smell of the oil off of her, and so her mom can wash her uniform for her shift the next day. And she goes out and she tells her mom and dad goodnight, and then she goes in her bedroom, locks the door, and she does one final tweet. Quote, "You doing shit like this is why I will never completely trust you." End quote. That is the last tweet that Skylar will say in her own words. She does do a retweet, which is just sharing somebody else's tweet later that evening, but that is the last tweet that goes out of Skylar's words. July 6, 2012, at about 12:31 a.m., Skylar climbs from her bedroom window, making sure to leave a sliver of it open so that she can get back in once she's done joyriding with Sheila and Rachel. And then from a grainy image from the apartment security system, you can see Skylar running from her bedroom window to a light color sedan where she climbs into the back. We know this to be Sheila's car, and Rachel and Sheila are in the front. Skylar climbs into the back of the car as Rachel and Sheila sit up front. They have their hoodies on and they're laughing and carrying on their own conversation. And Skylar's in the back just kind of watching the world go by as they head out of town. Now, Star City, their curfew is in full effect even throughout the summer. So when Sheila and Rachel spot a cop just before crossing the border, they kind of do like a little detour, they come back around to make sure that the cop didn't see them, and before they get back on the interstate, and they go across the border into Pennsylvania. And then they get off at the Mount Morris exit, and then Sheila weaves the back roads leading up to the girls' favorite spots. Once they get there, the three girls get out of the car and they head up the road just a little ways to the spot that they always went to sit down and smoke. And Sheila produces this joint from her hoodie before she realizes that she, quote unquote, left her lighter in the car. Skylar offers to go get hers, and as soon as she turns around, Sheila and Rachel count to 3. 1, 2, 3. Sheila and Rachel begin stabbing Skylar over and over and over. Each time they sink their knife into Skylar's flesh, they release pent-up aggression. They release hatred. They take a deep breath knowing that their secret is now safe with just themselves. Skylar ends up putting up more of a fight than either one of them really were prepared for. And Skylar somehow wrestles the knife away from Rachel and cuts Rachel on her right ankle. And it's about a 3-inch gash. But in the adrenaline-fueled attack, Rachel eventually gets the knife back from Skylar and continues to stab her friend. Before Skylar succumbs to her injuries, she's left with one last thing. She simply asks the girls, why? Sheila and Rachel just look down upon their friend as she slowly bleeds to death and takes her last breath, and the gurgling sounds coming from her throat stop. It's over. With over 50 stab wounds, Skylar Neese is dead. Now with Skylar gone, Rachel and Sheila had a task. They had to get rid of her body. They go to the trunk of Sheila's car and they get out the shovels that they had in the back. When they go to push the spade of the shovel into the ground, they realize it's not forgiving, it's too rocky, and digging a shallow grave was virtually impossible. So instead, they drag Skylar's body over to a piece in the wooded area a little bit and start covering her with branches and leaves, just debris laying around from the heavily wooded area. And once they have her covered, they put her phone and her purse out there. They strip down out of their clothes and they clean up. Now, investigators speculate that they celebrate killing their friend by having sex. If they do have sex, neither Sheila or Rachel have said anything about it. That night and what happened is all we can do is speculate what neither one is not willing to say. So we do know that they removed their clothing, they put it in a garbage bag, and they got rid of all the evidence and got dressed, and they drove back to Morgantown like nothing even happened. They left their friend laying in the forest, open to the elements, open to the animals, and they didn't care. They didn't care at all. Even though Skylar was skeptical of her so-called friends, she could not help but follow the leader. In her own way, this was so she could keep a hold of their friendship. Third wheel or not, Skylar didn't want to lose the two people that were closest to her. She couldn't imagine life without her best friend Sheila, even when she was being a bitch. But more than anything, Skylar wanted to feel accepted by Sheila Eddy and Rachel Shoaf. In the end, a young girl lost her life because being unfriended was too hard. The idea of her spilling their dirty little secrets scared them so much so that murder was the only way out. In the world of religion, a child raised in the church saw taking a life of a fellow human being of something of a lesser sin than outed as gay. Looking at this, you can see that two teenagers never thought past the ends of their noses. Yes, they all fought. Yes, there may have been feelings that were deeper than friendships between Sheila and Rachel. But none of those needed the solution they chose, a permanent solution to a temporary problem. Was there mental illness at play? Possibly. But in the end, mental illness or not, they took a bright-eyed soul full of potential from this world, from her parents. Mary and Dave closed their eyes, never aware that when they opened them again, their lives would look completely different. I want to thank you all for joining me tonight as we stepped into the world of high school, some of us traveling back, and some it's still a fresh mark on the scars of their lives. Either way, we see that decisions were made actively changing the future of three bright young girls. Like always, I will leave you with one last line. Sometimes growing up means growing apart. Much love, the true crime librarian.